we're going to be hearing from Nigel Cleur from CIBT Visas. I think one of the things that obviously we're all very familiar about is the fact that the beginning of this year, Brexit came into effect. At the same time, travel activity was severely suppressed. And I think that actually this is going to be one of the biggest challenges for us once we do start traveling again. The world of visas and work permits has changed substantially. And I think that part of what we're going to have to do is provide as much guidance as possible for our customers. So I think I've asked Nigel this morning to talk about how we can now navigate the complexities of post-Brexit travel. So I'll hand over to Nigel to talk on this topic.
Perfect. Thanks, Jules. Hope everyone can hear me okay. So we started off with Nico giving quite a positive outlook on the world. So I'm going to bring that crashing down to earth and start talking about Brexit. So bear with me. Obviously, as organisations start looking at returning to travel, one of the key areas that they do really need to focus on is that UK to Europe travel. Traditionally, in a travel policy, those European point-to-point trips have probably been the easiest part of a travel policy. You probably book them online and don't really give it much consideration. It is literally popping on Eurostar to go to Paris for a quick 1-hour meeting, and then coming back and finishing your work off in the office. But with Brexit and the withdrawal agreement, that's thrown a lot of extra complications and complexities into that area of travel. We've seen this firsthand, obviously dealing with the visas and the immigration side. And really what we've seen is clients almost go through this like emotional roller coaster almost. They start off with shock in terms of the complexity that is now in place, and then that moves through to frustration in terms of just how long and how complex the process is to get a work permit, even if you're only going for a couple of days business trip. And then it moves through to just the resignation. This is Brexit, this is what was voted for, this is the world we're in. So how do we deal with that? So what I'm looking at today is I'll just be focusing on some of the high-level strategic thoughts that you should be addressing, really just to try and give you some visibility around the requirements that are now in place. So really you can start to strategically plan for when you actually do start traveling. Thanks, Andy, for bringing up the first slide there. So just taking a step back, CIBT as a parent company is made up of two different entities. We've got CIBT Visas as one division and Newland Chase as the second division. And next slide, Andy. Brilliant. In a post world, things were very nice, very simple. CIBT Visas would handle the traditional business visas, the transient travelers, the short-term visa requirements. And as you moved up the complexity of requirements, then Newland Chase would take over. So they would look after the global mobility, relocation work, immigration work. And just hit the next pop-up. Brilliant. But what Brexit has done, it's actually forced the worlds of business travel, immigration, and mobility. It's forced them together, and those clear divides have now been completely blurred. And you actually have a situation now where business travel or business travelers actually need to conform and follow the regulations that are in place for immigration. And this is really at the heart of what is causing the complexity and frustration in terms of looking at that return to travel and moving forwards. Okay, yeah, next slide. So just as a summary in terms of what actually has changed. So obviously everyone's aware, 11 o'clock, 31st of December, all bets were off, freedom of movement came to an end as we formally left the EU. But as I'm sure everyone is aware, the UK government, and to a lesser extent the EU, were very keen to highlight the fact that there is still visa-free travel. They've highlighted, this is available for standard business activities and obviously for tourists. And really the main condition that the relevant governments have been looking at is you just need to be aware of this 90-day allowance within your 180-day allowance. Yeah, that's a really nice soundbite, that although we've left the EU, you can still travel on business without needing a visa. The problem is the world and the EU is not that simple. Although the agreement was set, it was done at an EU level, and it still needed ratification by the individual 27 EU states. And that's really where the problems have occurred. Each of the individual states have looked at the definitions of business activity, and they've interpreted them completely differently. Now, that has created a situation where if you're in Europe coming to the UK, although you've got new rules that are in place, you've only got one set of regulations that you need to worry about, i.e. the UK regulations. But a UK traveller needing to travel into Europe, as they used to do in 2020, now has to really consider 27 potential different applications of regulations. So it is a lot more complex. And just a recent update, just last week, formally the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, TCA, was formally ratified by the EU. And a number of EU states have now said, okay, because that has now been finalized, that ratification, we will start reviewing and trying to come into line to give that level of standardization and conformity. But there's no set timelines for them to do that. And as I'm sure everyone is aware, the EU does move very slowly on these things. So don't expect there to be quick, easy changes in terms of standardizing those policies. I think a really good example is Spain. So last week, as the EU formally said, okay, this is now ratified, Spain sent out messages to say, okay, we will now conform to some of the work permit exemptions around engineering, around the engineering sector. Within 2 days of making those announcements, they reneged on those. So they've gone back to say, no, we are not applying those exemptions. And we're seeing that across all of those EU states. Next slide. So really, just to give you some idea of how that complexity plays out within the EU, I've just put up here, I'm aware you may not be able to read it. It might be a bit unclear, but obviously this will be available afterwards. I've just listed a couple of activities there and some EU states. So to start with, a typical activity the business traveller may undergo, negotiating or signing a deal or contract. Now, if you're doing that in Austria or the Czech Republic or Germany, absolutely no problem. They consider that to be a business activity. Whereas Hungary and the Netherlands, they do not see that as a business activity and therefore not visa-free. So if you were doing that activity in those countries, you technically would need to look at a work permit. Likewise, carrying out site visits or inspections. Generally, Germany, Hungary, as examples, business activities. Czech Republic, it depends on what those inspections are. Typically, the divide is it a hands-on inspection or is it just a visual inspection of something? Attending training events and conferences. This is probably one of the areas that has caused the most confusion, because within the definitions of business activity that the UK government has put forward, they do say training and attending conferences is considered a business activity, which in theory it is, except it does depend on the detail of what that training is, where it's taking place, etc. So Germany, Hungary, they don't make any distinctions. If you're going for a training session, that's fine. Others, Austria, the Netherlands, it does depend on what that training is. And the typical distinctions on those are, Is it internal training? Is it external training? Have you paid to attend the training? Is that training likely to generate direct commercial activity as a result of the training? So these are the questions that you need to be asking. So really the takeaway here is individual travelers, organizations, as they're preparing to go back to travel, really need to start thinking, I'm not just a business traveler, but am I traveling on business or work? And that will be determined by almost the granular activity that you're doing and the country that you're actually doing that activity in. Next slide. So I've just put up here some current examples that we've been working on, just again to highlight, almost the mindset that you almost need to get into now, and some of the complexities that we're dealing with for clients. So in Denmark, we recently had one client who's hosting a live event at the end of June. That event, they're only going for 3 days. The event is for 1 day. They're prepping on day one, event day two, and obviously, taking down the stage, etc. on day three. But even though they're only going for 3 days, they actually do need a work permit and also a residency permit. And this is one of the biggest confusions people have. It's like, why do I need a residency permit? I'm only going for 3 days. But the simple answer to that is business travel now sits under immigration. So the terminologies are the immigration terminologies. So you will see a lot of work permits with residency permits, even if you're only going for 1 or 2 days. Likewise, we had another client who was going to Denmark. Again, they've got engineers doing installations. But the key definition here is, unlike the first client who needed a work permit, this client was able to go and do their installations visa-free, work permit-free, because Denmark has an exemption, which they call the fitter rule. If you are a specialist technician installing a piece of machinery that your company has sold to a client, i.e. there's a level of specialization needed, then you can do that in Denmark without needing a work permit. And moving on, Germany, one large engineering company needing to send engineers to work in their factory on the assembly line. They do need work permits, even though they're going to the same company, working in their own factory. The type of work they're doing, hands-on productive work, does require a work permit. One good thing with Germany is the UK and Germany are now best friend status, or privileged nationals. So we are on there is a fast track process for certain work permits in Germany. That privileged national status is Canada, US, Japan, South Korea, and the UK. So although you may need a work permit, there is a fast track route that may be open to you, and it's identifying those channels and being able to exploit those. And likewise, a client installing a new electrical system that they've sold to a canning factory in Germany. Because of the nature of the activity, i.e. it's a canning process, so it's in the food production, it's considered to be of national interest. And therefore, they are actually exempt from needing a work permit. So you could say that the two activities, engineering, installation, are the same, but one needs a work permit, but the other, there's a work permit exemption that applies because of the client that they're going to see. All they need to do is just lodge a labour notification, which is something that we can do online and takes just a couple of days to get the confirmation. Spain, as I mentioned with Spain, they were hopefully looking at adding engineering to the exemption list, but unfortunately that is not the case. So we've had a number of clients, not sure what's going on in Spain, but their power stations seem to be needing a lot of repairs this year. We've had a number of clients doing these jobs, but unfortunately they do need work permits. And just lastly on those examples, France, a fashion house doing a photo shoot in France. they were doing two photo shoots, one in France, one in Italy. France was exempt because they had models in the photo shoot. So there's a clear exemption for modeling and artistic posing, as they call it in France. Whereas in Italy, because there were no models, it was just a static photo shoot, they actually needed to apply for a work permit. So hopefully that gives you some idea of some of the complexities that are in play at the moment. And Andy, just hit the pop-up. Brilliant, thanks. So really, what I'd be looking at, in terms of the takeaways from those examples is, regardless of the length of stay, you still may need a work permit. We do often get queries from clients, I'm only going for 1 day, I'm going for 2 days, why do I need a work permit? The validity in a general sense doesn't really affect the requirement, it's the activity that you're doing. And following on from that, the same activity, but in different countries, will be under different regulations. So the same activity in France may need a work permit, but in Germany may actually be exempt. So really what you need to start doing as an organization in preparation for sending travelers out is really start looking at what do we do at that granular level and get a clear understanding of these are the activities that we do and these are the countries that we do it. And from there, you can start building up your project forecasting. You'll be able to identify where those red flags are or where the potential hotspots are in terms of needing to send individuals to do jobs. And just lastly, whilst I'm highlighting the need to get work permits, one of the key things is by having that visibility on the activities that you're carrying out and the clients you're carrying them out for, that can lead to any number of exemptions. There are just as many exemptions to needing to get work permits as there are work permits. It's just those exemptions are not pushed forwards by the relevant countries. You need to dig, or we on your behalf need to dig and find those exemptions that are relevant for you. Okay, thank you. Next. Yeah, should we just bring up all the points? It's probably easier that way. One more, perfect. So really, just to give you a quick summary in terms of factors around that withdrawal agreement that are directly affecting organizations now as they look forwards to traveling again. So the key one is that there is this lack of consistency in the application of the withdrawal agreement. You have 27 different interpretations of how to apply the regulations. Although we have said tourist and business activity are visa free, it's that limited definition of business activity that is really the crunch point, and understanding where you sit within that definition. So from the government website, as I've just mentioned, business activity would be traveling for meetings, conferences, providing services, or touring art or music. So it's a very loose, generic application, and we are finding it's not applying to probably 80%, if not more, of clients who are now needing to travel. As I'm sure you're aware, although you may be visa free, you do have to monitor that 90-day allowance within any 180-day rolling period. And crucially, this does include leisure trips. So that is a conversation that clients have to have with travelers. How do you manage someone's personal travel? As a general rule, the liability does sit with the traveler. It's their responsibility to ensure they are not exceeding their 90-day allowance. But obviously, if you're sending a traveler on business and they have or will exceed that there is an element of liability on your part as the employer. So having a conversation with travelers and trying to work out how do we manage this, that is key. So yeah, as I've just mentioned, travelers need to mention or to monitor. Just Andy, just on that last point, what we are noticing is there is an increased connection between COVID restrictions and work permits. we have seen any number of individuals being denied entry at the border because they're attempting to come into the country as visa-free business travelers. And they're being turned away at the border because of the COVID restrictions. And the logic of the border control guards is, if you're coming here visa-free as a business activity, then that's a non-essential activity. If it's a non-essential activity, I'm not going to let you in because of COVID. Whereas had they have got work permits, then that would have almost moved them up the pecking order a bit, and their activities would have been considered potentially more essential. It's not a guarantee of getting in, but it puts you your best place, you know, in terms of getting in. Thanks. Perfect, thanks. So yeah, just some anecdotal feedback from clients or cases that we've been working on. So I've mentioned that the UK and Germany, who would have thought, were best friends, but there you go, we are. It's one of the crazy things about Brexit. But that best friend status does mean that you know, you do have that fast track element in terms of the visa applications. However, what we have noticed, although we are best friends with Germany, they have been restricting the validity of UK national work permits. Typically, the average work permit should be valid for 12 months, but for UK nationals, Germany are generally issuing those for 6 months. There's no reason behind it, it's just one of those things that they're doing. One of the biggest areas, one of the biggest grey areas in terms of application or definitions of activities, as you've probably seen Elton John and any number of musicians, entertainers, etc., highlighting this. The entertainment and media sector has almost been completely left out of the withdrawal agreement. There is a total lack of consistency and clarity as to the definitions of activities for clients that are in the entertainment and media sector. So if there's anyone on the call within those sectors, I think that's probably a conversation that we could definitely take offline, you know, via Julian and the Meon team. And amazingly, we have seen so many travelers denied entry at the border because they're trying to go in as visa-free business activity, and they have quite literally been carrying toolkits. You know, I don't think there's any excuse for you know, being denied entry. If you're trying to get in and you're carrying a toolkit saying I'm just coming here for a business meeting, then, well, you know, that's enough said on that, I think. Processing time. Typically, the work permits are taking around 2 months to process. It can take longer. What we would normally have hoped in a pre-COVID environment is it would take 4 to 6 weeks. But in the current situations, the average turnaround is 2 months. We have seen some in Italy, which is notoriously more bureaucratic than other EU states. Some work permits have been taking up to 11 months to be processed, or will take up to 11 months to process. So obviously, if you've got a UK national that is needing that work permit for Italy and they have to wait 11 months before they can fulfill a project, you're going to have to look at, do we have alternative travelers that we can send to manage those projects? And as the months have gone on, there was a hope that the restrictions would ease and things would settle down. It doesn't seem to be the case. If anything, it does actually seem to be that the EU nations are applying more restrictions and being more rigorous or vigorous in their inspections. Whether that's just because of COVID or whether it's because of Brexit, you know, jury's out on that. But Norway is a good example. In the first couple of months of the year, Norway was very keen to issue exemptions to UK nationals, especially those in the energy sector, you know, obviously going on the oil and gas platforms. But they changed that policy, and they actually made the application process a lot harder. You know, they removed those exemptions. On a positive though, sporting events generally do seem to be consistently applied across the EU. We're currently working with a number of sporting events, football, racing, etc. And most countries are quite good at actually issuing exemptions for professional athletes. The issue with that then is, do the exemptions just apply to the athletes or sports person, or do they extend to the team? So physio, managers, marketing, who obviously go along to a number of events. How far down the line do those exemptions apply? But generally, if you're looking at a sporting event, you're in a better place certainly than if you're in the entertainment or media sector. And interesting one. This has occurred a couple of times, both in France and in Germany. When people have been entering the border, their laptops have been inspected, and they've been specifically asked what they use the laptop for. Now, the obvious answer is, well, I check my email and go online. But a number of people have actually been caught out because they've got specific technical diagnostic programs on their laptops. And because they've got those, then technically they should apply for an export license, a temporary export license, to bring that laptop in. It's one of those, what are the chances of you being stopped and your laptop being inspected and you have a diagnostic program on it? It's going to be minimal, but it has happened. So it's more just a heads up if you are likely to be in that scenario. Thanks, Andy. So I just wanted to quickly just touch on the visa-free side of things. So although you've got visa-free travel if you do conform to those business activities, there are still a number of things that you need to make sure you've got in place, bearing in mind that UK nationals are now third nation individuals going into Europe. One of the biggest things is you can no longer use the fast track. We have to queue up with everyone else. So when travel does pick up again, that could actually add an extra hour or 2 hours to your journey time. So bear that in mind when you're booking meetings. You can't land, jump in a taxi and go straight to a meeting. You'll need to allow time to queue at border control. But typically the things you need to make sure you've got is your passport has at least 10 years. Oh, sorry, has been issued within the last 10 years, has at least 6 months validity left. And crucially, that individual business travelers are have a justification. So a company support letter and a company invitation letter justifying why they are traveling. And also have proof of funds and adequate medical insurance. Ideally, if they can have copies of the cover notes for the insurance, or those policy details can be built into the company support letter, but some notification that they are covered. Likewise with proof of funds, the obvious one would be a company credit card, but where that company credit card is not available, if you can highlight in the company letter that all expenses on the business trip will be covered by the company, etc. And although you may not need a visa, there may be other documentation or regulations that you need to comply to. Typically, the most common are the posted worker notifications and A1 social security certification. Posted workers and A1s have been in play in Europe for a number of years. It's just everyone's ignored them, quite frankly, over the last few years. And it's really just as a result of Brexit that these have now come to the forefront, and EU nations are looking to enforce these more vigorously. So, they may be needed even if you are visa-free. And again, if you're visa-free, you may also just need to do a quick notification, a local labour office or a police notification. So visa-free doesn't mean there's nothing for me to do. It just means I don't literally need a visa or work permit, but I need to check, whether I need to apply for or lodge any other notifications. Thanks. So just trying to look at this from a high level, what are the things, as you're starting looking at, sending people into Europe, whether they're sales teams, whether they're engineers to fulfill existing projects, etc. What are the things that you need to look at? I think really the starting point is compliance. And this is an internal discussion within your own organizations. It's how compliant do we need to be? What are the risks? And that really comes from identifying what those activities are and how you want to manage that risk. For every one person that's stopped at the border, there may be 10, 20 other people that are just going through that are not business travelers. But it's managing that risk. From our side, because we're a formal licensed immigration advisor, we will provide you with the facts. What you do with those facts, is down to the internal policies within your organizations. But following on from that, you definitely do need to just start having that visibility and awareness over, is this a business trip, or is the activity likely to be a business trip, or is it likely to be a work trip? There'll be some trips which will be quite clearly easy to assess. I'm going to meet a new sales, I'm going on a new sales meeting to meet a client, and I'm literally just saying hello, introducing the company, and that's it. That is a business activity. But there will be a significant number where it sits in that gray area, and you will need to assess that. And that's obviously where we can help, is looking at those activities and making those assessments. As we mentioned, monitoring the number of days, that 90-day allowance, just having those internal conversations with travelers, how are we going to manage this? How do we track both business and leisure activity? There's not one single answer for that. And again, it goes to the internal culture within your organizations. And just looking at the ensuring travelers get the right permits, as I've shown before, there is that complexity. So you can't assume that your activity will be visa-free, or actually that you need a work permit. You need to do that assessment to make sure you're getting the right documentation. And that documentation could just be a visa-exempt justification letter, as opposed to the work permit itself. And if we consider the case of Italy, with an 11-month processing time for some visas, you've really got to start looking at your global workforce. How practical is it to send a UK national to fulfill a job? It's the sad truth, but that's the situation that Brexit has put in, has put the UK in. Are there other nationals that can fulfill this job quicker, easier, cheaper? And I mentioned on the previous slide, just because there may be no visa, it doesn't mean there isn't any other documentation that you may need. Okay, next slide. So really, just how can we help? We're doing this session, so regular webinars, consultations with clients. We've been doing this since November time. Just working with clients either on a case-by-case basis, or looking more strategically, where clients are saying, we have these projects in these countries, and these are the activities that are associated with those projects. And we're giving them a like a high-level country-based strategy document saying, okay, these are visa-free, these need work permits, here's the timeline. And from those documents, clients can actually then start doing some effective project management around Brexit and movement of travelers. We're also supporting with those additional documentation. So we're not just focused on visas and work permits. If you do need to make the posted worker notifications, A1 submissions, we can also assist with that. And I've just put there, just as a reference, just if you're not aware, A1 is a certificate that demonstrates that you are paying your social security in your home country, and you're not liable to pay social security payments in the country where you're in the EU country where you're working. It is literally a certificate. It can either be a paper one or an online version. And a posted worker notification is quite simply where someone is going into the EU to carry out their normal working activity. This is quite important because we've had any number of cases where individuals have come to us to say, I'm just going to meet a client for a sales meeting, which is fine as business activity. And then they would add, and then I'm popping into my local office to carry on work. And it's that extra bit that potentially means a posted worker notification or a work permit may be needed. So again, it goes back to that issue of understanding exactly on a granular level what travelers are doing. And sponsorship licenses, predominantly for the UK, if you are employing non-UK nationals in the UK, you do need a sponsorship license. If you haven't got a sponsorship license or want to just make sure that the details are still valid and correct, we can assist with that. Thanks. So yeah, just finally, just key summary points. So hopefully, as I've mentioned and highlighted, Brexit unfortunately has added this extra layer of complexity for business travelers. And you do need to be aware that these complexities exist. And as part of that, you do need to be looking at those activities at that high level, granular level, and crucially, the countries that they're actually being done in. So you get that full visibility. And really, one thing that we've noticed is business travelers are kind of like, with some organizations, being left in limbo. It's they're not quite moved over to be under the remit of global mobility or immigration because they're only traveling for a couple of days. But they've got all those immigration complexities, so the travel managers are not comfortable in dealing with them. They want immigration to deal with it. So you've got this push-pull with the business travelers in the middle. So just clarification over which stakeholders own business travelers in this new Brexit world, as it were. So that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nigel. I think for many, this may be the great unforeseen. I think that the first point on your last slide, the word complexity, it certainly is. But I think it's great that we've hit it head on. Again, we have worked with CIBT for a number of years on the visa front. And operationally, we have integrated your services into sort of our service offering. Yeah. We will be sharing more about how we can help our customers moving forwards. And that will be done sort of at an operational level and with support from our account management team as well. So yeah, definitely. To our customers out there, we'll be sharing more. We've had some wonderful questions in. So you've demonstrated some great knowledge, but we're going to test you a little bit further. Okay?
I'll have a sip of coffee first then.
Okay, perfect. So first question's for Michaela, and she's asked, is religious ministry deemed as business activity in general? It's really testing you. And you can
wow, that is a really good one. I would need to come back on that one. We so far have not had that as a defined activity. I suppose there are a number of follow-on questions from there. You know, exactly what is that ministry? Is it literally giving a sermon period, or is it part of a larger conference potentially? You know, that there are extra complex questions, but yeah, that's definitely one for offline. But the simple answer is that there is not a simple answer to that.
Okay, so I think we'll probably need to arrange a conversation with Michaela. Okay, perfect. Jenny has asked, is the application for work permits the same for all 27 EU states, and do you need a new one for each trip?
Okay, the application process is not the same for all the states. They have their own processes and regulations, and they have different definitions of permit categories. So this is part of that complexity. So you may be a technical service engineer repairing a machine, but France calls that something completely differently from Germany, Italy, etc. So the process, there's 27 different processes. In terms of validity, it can be, as I mentioned, Germany at the moment is giving 6 months when they should technically be giving 12 months. But there are extended periods up to 2, 3, 4, or even 5 years, depending on the activity. The increased validity brings in extra complexities. An example would be Germany. If you're looking for an extended validity of more than 12 months, you actually need a landlord's letter, which has caused a lot of problems with individuals who are possibly going on a 12-month rotation, but only going to Germany for 3 or 4 days each week, and then coming home, and then going back again, and they're staying in hotels. most German hotels will not issue landlord letters. So those individuals now need to either stay in company bought accommodation or service departments.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Mary Jo's asked a question about processing time, but you did cover that off. Sharon has asked, we have some non-UK employees on permanent residency card. Do they qualify as UK nationals on a Schengen visa free?
It depends on their settled status. Again, that's giving specific advice. So we can look at those individuals, but the cutoff point to organise your settled status is the end of June.
Right.
One thing I would mention on that, though, the UK has changed its legislation a couple of years ago. You may recall a few years ago there was a policy of being quite vigorous in terms of immigration application, and that was deemed illegal. It is now actually illegal for you as an employer to ask your employees what their status is. It's discriminatory. So you can subtly hint that they need to look at it, but you can't ask them directly. It's similar, I suppose, with pregnancy. You can't ask if someone's pregnant. You know, the same. You can't ask their status.
Okay. And I think final question, this may fall into the same sort of explanation you just provided, that you'd need to give specific advice, but we've had a question come in from Catherine, said our COO from our Paris office is visiting the UK office on the 24th of May. Will he require a letter from our UK office to invite him, as well as the visas to travel from Paris to the UK?
Yeah, so with that particular one, it all swings on what are the activities he will be doing when he gets here. If he's just meeting a new client, for example, then that could sit under a business activity and be visa exempt. If he's coming from the Paris office to the UK office to carry out his work, then that could be the trigger that moves it into a work permit environment. So it would need an assessment on exactly what that individual is doing. But in terms of the support letter, yes, everyone, regardless of what their activities are, should always, wherever possible, carry a company support letter identifying who they are, what their roles are within the company and what they're doing. And likewise, ideally have an invitation letter from the other side, the host, you know, obviously complementing that support letter.
Okay, perfect. Well, I haven't seen any more questions come in, so thank you everyone for your questions. As I say, we're going to be providing further detail, hopefully early next week, about how we're sort of working more closely with CIBT to assist your travellers moving forwards. Nigel, thank you for the presentation.
No problem. Thank you.
Extremely informative.